sorry. I'm not into short guys.
Tall, ugly guys, or short and handsome guys?
I'll take a tall, ugly guy, honestly.
Yeah?
Yeah, a tall, ugly guy over a short, good-looking guy.
Alright.
I want you to look at this study. This graph shows the minimum, ideal, and maximum heights women chose to date for guys based on the woman's own height. There's a little under 3,000 opinions in this single chart. So we have the woman's height on the x-axis here. These are the heights of the men available to date, and this translates to the graph where we have the acceptable range between the outer two most lines, with the ideal slotting in the middle. Now, one more thing to note is that each of these individual data points is taken as an average. So this data point here is the average maximum height a woman who's 5'7" would like to date. This point here is the average minimum height a woman who's 5 foot would like to date. To be clear, this is not to say all 5 foot women have 5'7" as their minimum. Rather, it means there were opinions spreading up and down the scale for women of this height, but the final data point that made it to the graph was the average of these opinions. Anyway, what can we derive from this graph? Well, the first interesting thing I noticed is looking for how the minimum line, at no points does it come into contact with the male to female height matched line. What this means is for women, regardless of their own height, they'd not date a guy who is the same height as them. For women, the minimum is that you have to be at least an inch taller and sometimes more just to appear on the radar. Therefore, right off the bat from this, we can write off the common lie women say, as long as he's the same height as me, I'd be open to dating him, as false. And instead, for the truth of what the phrase should actually say is, the minimum height I'd date is at the very least an inch taller than me, but ideally I'd like him to be several to have a strong desire. Moving to the next point. The next analysis of the chart I have is women's height standards increase the taller she is herself. This is clearly shown in the graph through the general upward trend. Getting specific with the numbers, for the average 5'9" woman, the minimum height she would date is 5'10". A woman who's 5'5", which is the mean height in fact for females in Western nations, the minimum for her is 5'8". And lastly, a woman who's 5 foot on the dot, the minimum for her is 5'7". But again, I'll repeat, this doesn't mean all women who are this height have this minimum standard. There are going to be a handful of 5 foot women whose minimum is 5'6", 5'5", or 5'4". Likewise, there'll be some whose minimum is 5'8", 5'9", or 5'10". But all of these opinions combined led to the mean minimum height for 5 foot women being this point here of 5'7". Anyway, understanding this, what this clearly shows is if you're a shorter guy, you have better chances trying your luck with shorter women. However, that's not the full story, because interestingly, and this is probably the most eye-opening point of the study, it is in fact the shortest women who are the most hypergamous when it comes to height standards. And for anyone who doesn't know what hypergamous means, it simply means the desire to date up. Therefore, when I use it in this context, what I'm saying is short women demand the most relative to themselves bringing the least to the table. So, when we look at the chart, notice how the gap for the tallest women is only 1 inch between their height and the minimum, and only 4 inches from the ideal. Meanwhile, for the shortest women out there, their minimum is 7 inches away from their own height, and a staggering 10 inches from the ideal, which is just 2 inches away from wanting a guy who's an entire foot taller. So, when we focus on the length of these two lines, it shows the level of extra demands or height hypergamy women have. This is the height difference short women and tall women want. And it's clear to see for the shorter women, they have far greater claims compared to the taller women. So, why do short women want significantly greater height differences? Well, I have one explanation which I can't prove is true, but it does fit in line with the data. And I call it the children's pill. I think all women know deep down how tough short men have it in dating. So, thinking long term, they realise if they pick a short man to be with and have children with, there's a 50% chance their kid will have a really hard time dating when they get older. I say 50% because obviously if she gives birth to a girl who ends up short, it wouldn't be a problem. The kid will only struggle if it's a man who grows up to be short. Therefore, in order to counteract this, and I believe this is especially true for women who are already short, they have to raise their standards for height even higher to try compensate. Now of course, this won't be all short women, but this may explain the TikTok at the beginning where the short woman is dating the really tall guy. This is complete speculation, but I've seen a lot of attractive short girls dating really tall guys with average to below average faces like this one. And maybe these women think this is their only option because based on both partners' genetics, the most likely outcome for a male child will be an average height, average face man. According to medical professionals, the general rule for calculating a son's predicted height is by adding both the mother and father's height together, dividing that by 2, then finally adding 2.5. So for example, if the mother is 5 foot and the father is 6'3", their heights added together is 11'3", divided by 2 is 5 foot 7.5, and finally after adding 2.5 we get a predicted son's height of 5 foot 10. Not a bad result for a woman who's only 5 foot. And for those that are curious, when predicting a daughter's height, the process is the same, except you subtract 2.5 at the end instead of adding. But that doesn't matter because as we've already established, height is basically irrelevant for women's chances in dating. Anyway, back to the example. If she instead chose an average height guy with a good face, it's probable the son would end up as a chadlet, which is a combination of chad and manlet. And I don't think this is as good of an outcome as the 5'10" average face son. I think it's better to be average in both face and height than having either bad height and good face or good height and bad face. And to the looks of things, it seems most of you in the audience agree with me too on this point. Because when I released this community poll on my channel, the majority of you said the same, that it's better to be average for both than be compensating in either one of the others. So, what my overarching point is, there's a chance some short women out there also realise this, and are thinking ahead this far, in which case they would rather date the low tier normie tall guy than the average height Chad Light. Let me know what you think of this point in the comments, and while you're at it, also hit the like button if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, as it helps the YouTube algorithm. Anyway, so far we've spoken a lot about women's height preferences. Now, how about men's? Well, luckily, the study from the beginning has the data for this too, which will provide good grounds for comparison. Again, we have the minimum, ideal, and maximums. The first thing I noticed is for half of men, their maximum dateable height intersects the male to female height match line, which shows, in contrast to women, most men are comfortable dating a woman who is the same height, if not taller than them. What's even more interesting is when we relate this to this other study, which shows the height gaps of relationships. Here we see barely any couples where the woman is taller than the man. In fact, this would pretty much be a perfect bell curve until we have this huge drop off here, where the woman is even a fraction taller than the man. And based on both men and women's height preferences, I believe the only conclusion we can draw from this is that it is women who are preventing height matches from forming. 5'8" guys aren't rejecting 5'8" girls. Rather, 5'8" girls are rejecting 5'8" guys. And from my experience, I can confirm this too. I'm 5'10" myself, and I know plenty of girls who are the same height as me, or even 6 foot, that I find really attractive, and would have no problem dating. However, I know most of these girls would prefer to date a man in the 6'2" to 6'4" range, which leaves me out for these options. Following on from this, the next thing I picked up on is all men have far less strict boundaries for the minimum and maximum heights they date in women. As you can see, the zone of acceptable dating heights for men is about 20% larger than the zone for women. One more thing that isn't shown in the data, a staggering 29% of men said they have no minimum height preference whatsoever, while a depressingly low 6% of women said they had no minimum height preference. In other words, 94% of women said, that's 16 out of every 17 women, some guys are just too short. As for maximums, 30% of women said there's no such thing as too tall in a guy. They wouldn't care if he's 6'6", 6'10", or 7'2". 24% of men said the same thing about women, that there's no such thing as too tall. Anyway, all this shows is women are a lot more scrutinising when it comes to rejecting men based on their height. I've brought conclusive evidence. As a man, you will be discriminated in dating based on how tall you are, while women on the other hand pretty much get let off scot-free. As a closing thought, I'm sure you can even name yourself plenty of girls in your own life that if they were a man, they'd become near invisible in the dating market among women. Anyway, that's all the hype pills for today. If you want to see my other hype pill video, the link will be in the description. And if you've enjoyed, make sure you press the like button and leave any thoughts you have in the comments below, as it all helps the YouTube algorithm.